At Christmas dinner, my son-in-law called me a burden in front of everyone. I took my bag and left in silence. 5 minutes later, he received a message from his boss. That $1 million contract was canceled. The air was thick with the scent of roasted turkey and simmering resentment. For years, I had walked a tightrope of passive endurance, smiling through gritted teeth while my daughter, Sarah, and her husband, Mark, picked away at me. They saw me not as a father or a man who had built a life with calloused hands and quiet sacrifice, but as a resource to be managed, a potential inheritance to be claimed. Mark, in particular, was the ringmaster of this circus of ingratitude. He was a slick, ambitious man who had never seen a ladder he wouldn't trample someone to climb. I had spent my life as a structural engineer, building bridges and skyscrapers, but in their eyes, I was just old Mr. Arthur, a relic of a bygone era, too slow to understand their modern, fast-paced world. The holiday season was always the worst. It was their annual performance of superficial affection, a show put on for the benefit of their friends and my bewildered grandchildren. The presents were expensive, the food was lavish, but the words were always cheap. This year, the stakes were higher. Mark had been talking nonstop about a new contract, a game changer with a company called Meridian Innovations. It was a deal worth over $1 million, a final feather in his cap that would solidify his status in the corporate world. He'd barely spoken to me for weeks, consumed by the deal, only to suddenly invite me to Christmas dinner as if I were a good luck charm. I knew the real reason. My small retirement savings, a topic Sarah had brought up a dozen times, hinting at a financial partnership for a new business venture. It was always about the money. The evening was a predictable blur of polite conversation and thinly veiled disdain. Mark held court, boasting about the Meridian deal, his voice a little too loud, his laughter a little too forced. "I'm on the verge of making it big," he declared, raising his glass. "No more small-time projects. We'll be set for life." Sarah shot me a meaningful look, a silent plea for me to say something, anything, to open the door to a conversation about my assets. It all came to a head when my grandson, little Leo, stumbled and dropped his glass of sparkling cider. It shattered on the marble floor, and the sudden loud noise was like a gunshot in the tense silence. Everyone turned, and a panicked look crossed Mark's face. "Seriously, Leo, can't you do anything right?" he snapped, a flash of pure anger in his eyes. I knelt down to help the boy, but Mark put a hand on my shoulder, pushing me back. "Don't worry, Dad, I'll get it," he said, but his voice was tight. "Just don't strain yourself." His condescending tone was a slap. My daughter rushed over, whispering, "Dad, you know he's under a lot of pressure." I knew the pressure. I had spent 40 years under it, building a life, paying for her education, helping her buy her first home. I had been a bank, a confidant, a pillar, but now, in my twilight years, with a lifetime of experience and wisdom, I was nothing more than a frail old man to be managed. Later, as I sat alone on the sofa, a knot of sadness in my stomach, I heard them talking in the next room. They thought I was out of earshot, but the kitchen door was ajar. "I can't believe he's still here," Mark grumbled. "He's so slow, so out of it. We have to figure out a way to get him to sign over the deed to the lake house. It's just sitting there, losing value. He's just a burden. I love him, but he's old. He doesn't understand how things work now. He just holds us back. What's he going to do with all that money anyway? He should be helping us like a family is supposed to." The word settled in my chest like a lump of cold lead. After everything I had done, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, the years of quiet support, I was a burden, a resource to be depleted, a problem to be solved. Something snapped inside me. The patience I had so carefully cultivated over decades, the silent resignation I had worn like a second skin, vanished. My hand, which had been resting on the armrest, balled into a fist. I stood up, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt a flicker of the old fire. The man who had faced down corporate titans, who had navigated the perilous waters of billion-dollar contracts, was not gone. He was just dormant. I walked to the front door, grabbed my small travel bag, and began to put on my coat. Sarah appeared in the doorway, a startled look on her face. "Dad, where are you going?" Mark followed her, a look of annoyance on his face. "Dad, don't be dramatic. It's Christmas, come on." I pulled the front door open, stepping out into the cold night air. The city lights twinkled like a distant, uncaring galaxy. The cold stung my cheeks, but it felt good, a jolt of clarity. I turned back to them, my gaze sweeping over their faces, the surprise, the annoyance, the faint worry of what my departure might cost them. "Happy Christmas," I said, and for the first time, the words felt like my own. I closed the door behind me, the soft click echoing in the stillness. It wasn't a slam, it wasn't a dramatic exit. It was a period at the end of a long, sad sentence. As I walked to my car, I pulled out my phone. My fingers, steady despite the cold, flew across the screen. I found the number I needed, a number I had never thought I would use again, and sent a single, simple message to a man I had known for 30 years, a man whose company was the parent firm of Meridian Innovations. Cancel the proposal from Mark Hayes' firm. Tell him the reasons will be clear in time. Then I put the phone in my pocket and started the car. It was 5 minutes after I had walked out of their lives, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing what was coming was a warmth no fire could match. The game had just begun. The days that followed were a symphony of silence from my end and a rising crescendo of panic from theirs. Mark's initial text message to me was a mix of condescension and concern. "Dad, what was that all about? Don't make things difficult, let's talk about this." I didn't reply. I had already talked, listened, and waited for 30 years. My silence was the first piece of the puzzle, and to them, it was infuriating. They had no idea what I was doing. How could they? To them, I was just a senile old man who had thrown a tantrum. But they didn't know the real Arthur. They didn't know the man who had built half the city's skyline, the man who had a network of contacts that spanned continents, the man who had retired not out of weakness, but because he had built a quiet fortune and saw no need for the constant rat race. They had only ever seen the easygoing father, the doting grandfather, the man who paid for things without a second thought. They saw my kindness as naivete, my quietness as ignorance. It was their greatest mistake. My plan unfolded with the precision of a blueprint. The morning after Christmas, while they were likely nursing hangovers and speculating on my whereabouts, I was at my lawyer's office. Mr. Jenkins, a man as old as I was with a mind as sharp as a scalpel, greeted me with a solemn nod. "Arthur, I figured you'd be coming in soon," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "It's time, Thomas," I said. "Let's change everything." I established a trust fund for my grandchildren, with specific stipulations that the money could only be accessed for their education, and only when they came of age, without any parental interference. This was a crucial step, one that would remove the temptation for Mark and Sarah to manipulate their children for financial gain. I also signed the deed to the lake house over to my younger brother James, a man who had always stood by me and had a genuine love for that place. Sarah and Mark had been eyeing that property for years, seeing it as the crown jewel of their future inheritance. I could almost hear Sarah's voice in my head. "It's just sitting there, Dad, not anymore." As I was meticulously going over the documents, my phone buzzed with an escalating stream of messages. "Dad, what's going on? Mark's boss just called. The Meridian deal is off. They're saying it was a senior directive from the parent company. He's going crazy." They had no way of knowing my connection to the parent company, a venture I had helped fund and advise on in my early retirement. They just saw me as a simple man with a simple past. The irony was almost too sweet to bear. The very thing they used to dismiss me, my age, my perceived lack of relevance, was what gave me the quiet power to do what I had just done. Their frantic phone calls and text messages became more desperate. "Please, Dad, what did you do? Mark is going to lose his job. You can't do this to us." Mark's voice, usually so confident and booming, sounded thin and panicked in a voicemail he left. The veneer of his corporate persona was cracking, revealing the terrified, greedy man underneath. I remained silent. I was a ghost. They didn't know where I was. I had a small apartment in another part of the city, a quiet place I had bought years ago for moments of peace. It was my sanctuary, and now it was my fortress. I spent my days there, catching up on old hobbies, reading books I hadn't had time for, and enjoying the solitude I had earned. My only contact was with my brother James, who was a rock of support and understanding. He would call and update me on the drama, as he called it, and his voice would be filled with a mix of concern for me and contempt for them. "They're losing their minds, Arthur. Mark is blaming everyone. He even suggested it was a corporate rival who got to you. It's hilarious how little they know you." He chuckled. "They're trying to find out who canceled the deal, but my friend on the board said the directive came straight from the top. He won't even tell them who signed off on it. He had no one to blame but himself, but his arrogance wouldn't allow it. His fall was not just financial, it was existential. The confidence he exuded was tied entirely to his professional success, and without it, he was nothing. He was unraveling. I found a certain peace in their turmoil. It wasn't about revenge, it was about dignity. They had stripped me of it at that dinner table, piece by humiliating piece, and now I was taking it back. The more they panicked, the more they begged, the more I knew I was doing the right thing. My silence was my greatest weapon. It forced them to confront the very person they had so easily dismissed, but from a distance that felt insurmountable. They were reaching for me, but all they found was an empty chair. I wasn't just old Mr. Arthur anymore. I was a phantom. And they were beginning to realize that the phantom held all the cards. Their world, built on a foundation of my quiet generosity, was about to crumble. The final act didn't happen with a dramatic face-to-face confrontation, but with a series of revelations that hit them like a freight train. The first came in the form of a certified letter. I had my lawyer, Mr. Jenkins, send it on a Tuesday morning. It was a formal notice that my financial support to them had been officially terminated. This included the monthly stipend I had been giving them for years, the money I had been paying for my grandchildren's private school tuition, and the funds for their annual family vacation. The letter also stated that my will had been updated and they were no longer beneficiaries. I pictured the moment they read it. Sarah, likely with a cup of coffee in her hand, her expression turning from annoyance to disbelief as she saw the official letterhead. Mark, his face pale, the color draining from it as he realized the full extent of my actions. For years they had seen my support as a given, an endless well of cash to be drawn from. The well had just run dry. The letter was a simple legal document, but it was a declaration of war. My war, fought in the quiet offices of law firms and banks. Their reaction was exactly as I had imagined. Sarah called, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and feigned hurt. "Dad, how could you do this to your own family? We're your children." "You're leaving us with nothing." "I'm not leaving you with nothing, Sarah. I'm leaving you with what you've earned. Your own lives, your own bills, your own responsibilities. You can't just cut them off," she cried, a new and desperate note in her voice. The concern wasn't for her children. It was for the bills she wouldn't have to pay. "I've made sure they'll be taken care of," I said. And a new wave of fear washed over her. The truth was my grandchildren were indeed taken care of, but not in a way that benefited their parents. The trust fund I had established was a secure lockbox for their future, and the key was in my hands, not theirs. The second blow came a few days later. My lawyer had also sent them a letter regarding the lake house, a property that had been in my family for generations. The letter was a notice that the house had been legally transferred to my brother James. It was a property Mark had planned to sell to fund his new business, a plan he had shared with me only a few months ago, convinced I would go along with it. I knew he would check the property records. When he did, he would see the new deed, the name James Patterson scrawled across it. I imagined him standing there, his jaw slack, the arrogant smile that was a permanent fixture on his face now a mask of pure disbelief. It wasn't just money. It was the symbol of their future, the grand prize they had so coveted, now gone. The calls and texts ceased after that. The silence was deafening, a far cry from the chaotic noise of their panic. They had finally understood. This was not a negotiation, it was a done deal. I had used the very tools they had dismissed, my experience, my network, my careful planning, to dismantle the false life they had built on my back. My intelligence had not faded with my age. It had matured, becoming a silent, unstoppable force. On a Friday morning, I found a small news story online. It was a short piece in the business section about a prominent corporate manager, Mark Hayes, who had resigned from his position following the mysterious collapse of a major contract. The article used polite, professional language, but the subtext was clear. He was in disgrace. His world had collapsed. I read the story while sitting on my balcony, a cup of hot tea in my hands. The sun was warm on my face, and for the first time in years, I felt a genuine sense of peace. I had endured, I had survived, and I had reclaimed my dignity. I had not sought revenge, only justice. I hadn't just cut them off. I had forced them to stand on their own 2 feet, a foundation they had no idea how to build. My new life was simple and profoundly satisfying. I started volunteering at a local community center, sharing my knowledge of engineering with young, ambitious students who were genuinely curious. I reconnected with old friends, went on long walks, and read books from cover to cover. I was no longer a resource or a burden. I was just Arthur, a man who was finally truly free. The road ahead was unwritten, but for the first time in a very long time, I was excited to write it. The silence I had walked into that Christmas night was no longer an empty void. It was a peaceful, beautiful world of my own making. And the best part? No one could take it from me.